was a lot of news at the beginning of this year, which seems like another age, about the newly opened letters from T.S. Eliot to Emily Hale, sequestered at Princeton University Library since 1957. I'm Frances Dickey, Associate Professor of English at the University of Missouri, here to give you a taste of what I discovered in the 2 months I had access to Eliot's 1,131 letters, before the archive closed again. They were truly like Lazarus come back from the dead, come back to tell you all. Eliot was a man with a secret, a complex attachment to the woman he might have married. He told Hale that she had led him to the church and inspired him to write for the stage, and he depended on her emotionally throughout the 1930s and 40s. Eliot's relationship with Hale is the primary tell of these letters, but there's also a trove of other information including details of his marriage with Vivian, his family relationships, and his literary friendships and rivalries. His letters provide an autobiographical key to figures and scenes in his poetry and plays, describe moments that became passages in 4 quartets, express political opinions, and record his social and professional activities. In 8 minutes, I obviously can only share a portion of what we've learned, so I've chosen 3 examples of the discoveries that await us when the letters reopen and are published. Happily for those who have always been suspicious of Eliot's impersonality theory, his letters reveal how directly he drew on personal experience in his work. He tells Hale that his poetry is much simpler than people think, and it can all be explained with a simple key. He gets right to the point in his first letter, telling her that only she can understand the poem Ash Wednesday. In other letters, he addresses her as Lady, underscoring this parallel with the spiritual guide of the poem. In his second letter, Eliot turns to the wasteland, asking Hale to read the Hyacinth Girl passage and the lines of part 5 beginning, "Friend, blood shaking my heart." He offers these passages as evidence of how he has always written for her. His revelations confirm the interpretation that Lyndall Gordon proposed as early as 1988 in Eliot's New Life. Hale really was the Hyacinth Girl to Eliot. Another letter describes how he realized that he was in love with her after a performance of Tristan und Isolde that they attended together probably in November 1913. He devised various strategies for seeing her after that, although he had no hope of winning her heart. Finally, after a tea party that he gave, he almost spoke to her of his feelings, but lost his courage. When he thinks of this moment, he says, he becomes dizzy. His words bring new and explicit meaning to the lines, "I could not speak, and my eyes failed. I was neither living nor dead, and I knew nothing, looking into the heart of light, the silence." That silence is his. There are many other such discoveries in Eliot's letters, such as his matter-of-fact naming of figures in Gerontian as people he knew. Hakagawa, he tells Hale, is Okakura Kakuzo, the famed Japanese curator at the Museum of Fine Arts, and Mr. Silvero is Matthew Pritchard, an aesthete who exerted a certain fascination on Eliot, who was assistant director of the MFA. Make of that what you will. For Eliot, these identifications seem straightforward. For us, they raise as many questions as they answer. At first, Eliot's letters often point backwards to poems he has already written. As early as fall 1932, his language gives us fascinating glimpses into poems of the future as well. Many passages in landscapes and 4 quartets seem to originate in descriptions or reflections written to Hale. For example, there was a yew tree in the garden at Stamford House at Chipping Campden, England, where Hale stayed most summers from 1934 to 1939. On October 3, 1935, Eliot mentions a sprig of yew that Hale picked for us. He says it is special because in the past she has picked flowers for him, or rather me. But now they speak of themselves together, with the pronouns we and us. Eliot likely has the homonyms YEW and YOU in mind when he writes in Burnt Norton, composed a few months later, "Will chill fingers of you be curled down on us?" Here Eliot combines the churchyard reputation of the yew tree with the pronoun you to ask whether us will dissolve back into you and I. We also discover from these letters that Eliot heard the tolling bell buoy of dry selvages in Hale's company, not in Gloucester but in Woods Hole on Cape Cod, where they spent a week together at the beach in September 1936. He held on to this detail for 4 years before using it in the memorable passage. Under the oppression of the silent fog, the tolling bell measures time, not our time, rung by the unhurried groundswell, a time older than the time of chronometers, older than time counted by anxious, worried women, lying awake, calculating the future, trying to unweave, unwind, unravel, and piece together the past and future. Eliot's memories of Gloucester's fishermen and their widows enter into this passage, but I wonder whether Hale's own worries about the future contributed to his reflection on the disparity between time, as measured by human calculation, and the impersonal tolling of the bell buoy. My examples so far have concerned Eliot's interactions with Hale, but his letters also chatter, complain, and confide about the people he knew, such as Pound, Joyce, Wolfe, John Maynard Keynes, and other public figures. Especially in the early years of their correspondence, Eliot would enclose notes from such people to give her a taste of his circle of acquaintances. We learn, for instance, that many years before, Lytton Strachey fell down on his knees and kissed Eliot, who laughed. This episode brought their relationship to an end, more because of Strachey's embarrassment than Eliot's. Like Virginia Woolf's letters and diaries, Eliot's letters to Hale bring Bloomsbury to life in personal detail. Not everything is an anecdote. Eliot tells Hale that he had planned to visit Virginia and Leonard at Rodmell on the very weekend that she drowned in April 1941, but he postponed for health reasons. He says, sadly, that it is a visit that will never take place. You wonder how history might have turned out differently if Eliot had paid his promised visit. Reading these letters, you see how partial our knowledge of Eliot has been. In the early years, he delights in revealing information that will change how we read his poems long after his death. He always envisioned preserving their correspondence for posterity. In giving his letters to Princeton, Hale was faithful at least to the wishes of the younger man who wrote to her so passionately, starting in 1930. I hope that we will all meet together again at the summer school in 2021 to acquaint ourselves with this new Eliot and to celebrate the renewal of the land. Thank you.